A $4.7 billion bridge, built by Canada, approved by America, and now, just days before opening, the U.S. president threatens to shut it down. Not for safety, not for law, but for ownership and money. One signature could freeze the busiest border crossing in North America. This isn't construction news. This is power politics at the border. A $4.7 billion international bridge. 10 years in planning, backed by two nations, and now, just weeks before opening, the President of the United States is threatening to block it. This isn't a quiet trade dispute hidden inside government meetings. This is happening right now in public. The Gordie Howe International Bridge, connecting Detroit, Michigan to Windsor, Ontario, was designed to become one of the most important trade crossings in North America. A 6-lane cable-stayed structure over the Detroit River, it links Interstate 75 in the U.S. to Highway 401 in Canada. For years, both countries have treated it as a critical solution to congestion, security concerns, and economic growth at the busiest border crossing on the continent. But just as the bridge is nearly ready to open, President Trump has reportedly stated that the project may not move forward unless Canada transfers 50% ownership of the bridge to the United States and provides what he calls compensation for American involvement. That statement alone has triggered serious legal, political, and diplomatic questions. Because this is not just about steel and concrete. It's about international agreements, sovereignty, and whether binding commitments between allies can suddenly be rewritten. Here's what makes this situation unusual. Canada is paying for the entire project. Public records and bilateral agreements show that the Canadian government committed to financing, building, operating, and maintaining the bridge through a public-private partnership. The total cost is approximately 4.7 billion Canadian dollars, roughly 3.5 billion US at the time the deal was signed. The United States provided land access, regulatory cooperation, and border coordination, but no direct construction funding.
That arrangement was not informal. It was approved through treaties, legislation in Congress, and authorization by both governments. Construction began in 2018, and now the bridge is essentially complete. So when the president threatens to block its opening unless ownership is changed, it raises immediate questions. Can a sitting president alter a decade-old international agreement? Can one country demand ownership after the other has already paid the full cost? And what precedent does that set for future cooperation between allies? The U.S.-Canada border is the longest in the world and one of the most economically integrated. About $2 billion in goods crosses it every single day. The Detroit-Windsor corridor is the single busiest commercial land crossing between the two nations. For decades, most traffic depended on the aging Ambassador Bridge, built in 1929, now overloaded and outdated. That's why both governments approved the Gordie Howe project in the first place, to protect trade, national security, and economic stability on both sides of the border. Now, just before opening, that agreement is being tested. And what happens next could reshape how countries trust each other on infrastructure, trade, and long-term commitments.
The Gordie Howe International Bridge was built under a legally binding agreement between two sovereign nations. Canada paid for it. The United States approved it. Construction is finished. And yet, just before opening, that agreement is suddenly being challenged, not through diplomacy, not through renegotiation, but through political pressure. This is bigger than one bridge. It raises serious questions about how power is exercised between allies, about whether long-term agreements actually mean something when leadership changes, and about whether economic cooperation can survive if deals can be rewritten at the last moment. If the United States can threaten to block a decade-old infrastructure project with one of its closest partners, what message does that send to other countries, to investors, to future international projects that depend on trust and stability? International cooperation works only when commitments are respected. Trade depends on predictability. Infrastructure depends on faith between governments. Once that trust starts to break, the damage spreads far beyond a single border crossing. Right now, the world is watching how this story ends, because the real issue isn't steel, concrete, or ownership papers. It's whether global agreements still hold weight, or whether power now speaks louder than promises. If you want real stories behind global power, hidden deals, and political pressure that shape the world, stay connected with World Dark Files. Here, we don't follow noise, we follow documents, evidence, and the truth behind headlines. Subscribe to World Dark Files, because what happens in the dark always comes to light.